Hello and welcome to this episode of Futures, the podcast series brought to you by CIPS, the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply. Hi everyone and welcome to the CIPS Futures podcast. I'm James Moore, your host for this episode. Canada has been in the spotlight in recent months, and recently, as you may know, CIPS partnered with the National Institute of Supply Chain Leaders, representing a community of 12,000 Canadian professionals. The aim is very much to continue to build our global voice and connect procurement professionals around the world. In this episode, we've got a fascinating conversation with one of the most influential and inspirational leaders in Canada. It's a conversation that really explores the complexity of modern global supply chains and the elevated role the profession is now experiencing as a result. So, welcome to our guest for today, Nick Nanos, a Chief Supply Chain Officer at the Liquor Control Board of Ontario, or LCBO for short. Welcome, Nick. How are you today?
I'm doing fantastic. Thanks very much, James. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. I'm good. I hear it's a little bit warmer in the UK than it is over in Canada at the moment, where you're based.
It's closer to 15 below zero, so if you could send some warmer weather, it'd be much appreciated by us Canadians.
I'll do my best. Look, it's great to have you on, and Nick, we've spoken ahead of recording. You've got a great background in the supply chain profession. So, do you want to just give a quick snapshot of your career and experience and introduce yourself to the audience?
Yeah, absolutely, James. Thanks very much. So, I've been at the LCBO, as you referenced, for over 35 years, and I've held multiple very different roles right across the organization in retail, finance, specialty services. At one point, I headed up the corporate audit program, distribution, supply chain, and of course, wholesale. And I think the interesting thing about my career path is, my tenure at one organization and my journey from operations right into senior leadership. And that kind of lends well in terms of my background. So the first part is really a lot of operational experience right across the entity itself. And the second large component is I've done a lot of transformational work as well. And, different project work I've either led or been involved with in a leadership capacity is, new point of sale systems, sales audit, ERPs, order management, of course, warehouse management systems. And all of that rolls up together with, helping to lead transformation across the entity. I guess the only other thing I would add is, and it's pertinent here, is I do have a lot of focus on talent and education, and that's kind of related to, the NISCL and CIPS. I'm currently the vice chair of Canada's National Logistics Association, the CITT, and very actively involved in the NISCL and getting more active in the CIPS on a global basis.
Fantastic, and we'll absolutely get into a little bit of that later on. For those who aren't aware, NISCL, National Institute for Supply Chain Leaders, based in Canada. But yeah, it's great to have you. And also for someone who's been in an organization for that amount of time, it doesn't often happen these days. But I guess you show what can happen if you stick around and you kind of get engaged and get involved in the company from that kind of founding procurement operational aspect right through to where you are now as Chief Supply Chain Officer, I think is the role. So can you tell us a little bit about what that role involves? But I guess firstly, just to set the context again, maybe start with an overview of the Liquor Control Board of Ontario, just so listeners have some context as to the organization.
So the LCBO, or the Liquor Control Board of Ontario, is a Crown agency. For some of your listeners who may not be as familiar with Canada, Canada has 10 provinces and 3 territories. Ontario is one of the largest provinces here in Canada. And just for a little bit of context, there's over 1 million square kilometers in Ontario, which is about 9 times the size of England. So a significant amount of a geography that we cover. And we have about 14 million people within the province of Ontario itself. So we're a Crown agency owned by the government of Ontario. And we oversee all the importation and wholesale activities for beverage alcohol in Ontario. As an organization, we import product from over 80 countries around the world. On an annual basis, that translates into about 30,000 different unique products that we bring into the marketplace. Our supply chain infrastructure and network is vast, it's mature, and it's global in nature. We have 26 different consolidation points located strategically throughout the world. And as you can appreciate, some of them are in really wine-producing countries. So like a lot of them scattered across Europe and Spain, Portugal, Italy, France. We have some in Oceania, New Zealand, Australia, Chile, Argentina has some. Of course, U.S., and we're just currently in the process of opening up one in Mexico. So we've got a significant amount of infrastructure that we source globally to source beverage alcohol products. And that translates into about 30,000 20-foot equivalent units of containerized product annually and about 20,000 tractor trailers of palletized product. So when we've landed into the province, we have 6 different distribution centers and about 2.2 million square feet of warehousing and fulfillment space. And from those locations, we service our customer right across the province. And our customers we have our own 695 store network, and I'll comment about that in a minute. And then we have up to another 8,500 private retail customers that we service. And then we have about 18,000 bars and restaurants and hospitality type licensees that we service. We've got a huge global footprint. And, when people ask me about the LCBO that aren't from Canada, the best way to describe it is really to describe it as a global supply chain organization. We do sales of about $7.5 billion, and about $2 billion of that is wholesale. And so my role, obviously, is a chief supply chain officer. The other part of my portfolio is I'm also the senior vice president of wholesale operations. And so that P&L for the $2 billion flows into my portfolio as well. So that in a nutshell is kind of the ecosystem that we operate in. And, just like most of your listeners, I'm sure, are supply chain practitioners and in procurement. And, what do we focus on? The role is, and the teams are really focused on inventory planning, transportation, logistics, distribution, wholesale operations. The other thing we have is because we're the importer of record, we also have a laboratory that we have here at the LCBO for to test every product that we sell. And, in a nutshell, we ensure that all beverage alcohol products that we offer for sale, retail and wholesale, we make sure that they're authentic, they're safe for consumption, they're of sound quality, and then, of course, they're compliant with any regs or standards. So, it's a complex environment, not just because of the scale, but we've kind of got that balance between, government objectives to support policy and strategies and decisions with delivering on commercial results. It's a fun place to work.
You're sitting in that sort of crossover position of being a public entity, but having what would be considered more private sector goals at stages. So how do you balance that when those challenges come?
Well, we consider, we run it like a business. Of course, you have input, like our owner is a public, is the government. But like any owner, you make sure that you're consistent with the objectives and the strategies that they want the organization to go in. I often kid, I say we're very much an ambidextrous organization. And you can look at that on a number of different ways. The first part is it's a controlled substance that we're wholesaling and retailing, right? So you've got an element of social responsibility and moderation that you have to balance with, obviously, being a commercially viable entity and growing sales and profit and returning net income back to your ownership. So it's a very much an ambidextrous relationship in some ways.
Great. Yeah, I like that description, ambidextrous, best of both. Look, you're our first voice on the CIPS podcast from Canada. Congratulations, firstly. Thank you for joining us. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on the profession's sort of status, perception, I guess, in the region. Maybe from your personal lens and experiences first. How is the perception of your role, what procurement and supply chain and logistics teams do within businesses, organizations, whether that be private or public sector? How have they changed in recent years?
First off, it's thank you for making me the first Canadian on your podcast. It's changed quite a bit. So, I've seen supply chain and procurement move from being viewed primarily as a back office operational function to more of a central strategic part of the business. And there's a couple of shifts that have really accelerated this over the past few years, especially when I look at other industry colleagues. Other organizations have faced COVID and other disruptions. But on top of that, we've got evolving consumer expectations, and we've got a digital transformation that's occurring as well in many of these commercial environments. But on a more personal side for me, I think what I would also like to share is that, I was promoted to Chief Supply Chain Officer in 2020. And, that move really wasn't about recognizing my own work. It was really about acknowledging that supply chain leadership at the executive level is critical for navigating change and complex challenges. So whether it was responding to the different global supply disruptions, whether it was modernizing processes and systems, or just ensuring that, table stakes of ensuring that products reach customers efficiently and effectively, I've really seen how having supply chain represented at the most senior table has really helped to inform strategic decisions and manage risks and drive innovation across the organization. And that kind of brings me into like COVID. And then the second part of the big driver from a personal experience perspective has been the, what I would call the liberalization of the marketplace of beverage alcohol in Ontario. And I think it's important context for me to share with your listeners because, I mentioned earlier the LCBO is the importer and wholesaler of record for beverage alcohol. I think what's important for some background is that in December of 2023, our owner made a decision where they wanted to put certain components of beverage alcohol, beer, wine, ciders, ready-to-drink products into private retail and to expand private retail involvement in the ecosystem. And that really meant by January of 2026, that was the goal. And they wanted the ability to put it into up to 8,500 new private commercial entities at the retail level. So for us, that was a significant lift. But I think that was in December of 2023 where we had 2 years to do that. And then in May of that year, they came back to us and they said, listen, you're our agency. We need you to pull this forward. We need you to get this live into the marketplace by September of 2024. And, during the same period of time in July of 2024, we actually experienced our first labor disruption here at the LCBO. We had a 17-day strike within the organization. So we had these significant challenges that were going on. And I think it's a wonderful case study of success from a supply chain team because at the end of the day, we successfully implemented, end-to-end supply chain solutions. We did that by having collaboration with our suppliers, our partners. We really had to focus on, getting new product catalogs up and, focus on efficient logistics and distribution and really just ensuring rapid execution right across the province. So during that, 6-month period, we opened a brand new warehouse facility to ensure that we could support increased demand and scale operations to meet the needs of these up to 8,500 private retail stores. Concurrent to that, we had to expand last mile capabilities. So we partnered with new carriers. We had to create an entirely new commercial operations and wholesale services team. We hired almost 50 new professionals and established business processes. And, I could go on, but this was an outstanding achievement in 6 months. And it was really made possible by the supply chain team. And I think for me, when I look at COVID and then I look at marketplace expansion, the past 5 or 6 years have really, they've demonstrated or they've reinforced that certainly from my perspective, the LCBO success has depended on prioritizing its supply chain operations. And I think that's an experience that's shared by many organizations in Canada and candidly around the world today.
Fascinating insight. And I think, that sounds like it was a fundamental shift in business operations, how the organization wanted to work and who it wanted to work with. And as you say, the supply chain team, yourself leading it, were critical in making that happen. And I think that changes that perception of seeing, traditionally maybe procurement and supply chain being a back office operational function. You have fundamentally been part of a shift in how a business operates there and a really key part of bringing innovation in and making that happen. And even to do that with the challenges that you're going through at the moment. So I must be incredibly proud from yourself and your team for achieving that.
No, absolutely. The team has done a wonderful job in meeting and surpassing our strategic objectives, and it's just a wonderful ride.
Brilliant. You said that experience is, the raised perception profile, I suppose, of procurement is shared by others in Canada. It's certainly something we've seen from a global perspective, from the profession, from CIPS's own, say, procurement and supply reports. We've seen this influence growing at not just sort of within a business, but at C-suite level and beyond. Procurement getting involved in significant business operations like M&A, for example, is a key area where we're seeing growing involvement. But I guess there's been significant challenges during this time as well. It's presented opportunities for procurement to grow its profile and supply chain professionals, but also challenges. And has this profile continued and become even more important, I suppose, with all the volatility and uncertainty that we're experiencing in the kind of global markets?
Oh, the short answer is absolutely. It's when you really look at what we're facing today as organizations and as supply chain practitioners, I actually, thankfully, we had so many great lessons during COVID that we've been able to kind of learn and reapply as we go. Because today's environment, you've got tariffs, you've got all these geopolitical issues right across, the Middle East, you've got South America, you've got, the Russian invasion of Ukraine. There's so many different geopolitical issues. Weather events. Look in the last number of years, the weather events. Certainly in our space, we've had heat, fires, wildfires across Europe, here in Canada, across various different provinces, even in the US. We've had cold snaps, both in Canada. France had some significant cold weather a few years ago that impacted crops and yields as well. So weather events is a significant player as well. And for me, when you look at all these emerging global risks, I think one of the best things that came out of COVID for us, I go back and I think it's important is that we really got back down to basics. And, my late father was self-employed for 50 plus years, and he was a small business person, and he had restaurants and different retail outlets. And the interesting thing, he used to say, son, you cannot sell from an empty wagon. I remember this vividly. He would say this over and over again, because as a kid, we'd be taking inventory and, the reality is this is when we got into significant disruptive circumstances, and COVID is one example, that would be running through my head. And that was kind of foundational piece number one, keep the supply chain running. And everything that we did during COVID was a big learning experience and fascinating. But I think one of the key learnings that came out of it that has been applicable in everything we've faced, whether it's our own labor disruptions, whether it's in all these global disruptions, has been, it really cemented to me the criticality of ongoing risk planning, scenario modeling, et cetera, as being a real integral part of supply chain planning in the short, mid, and long-term perspective. And since COVID, I just look at all the different, just labor disruptions alone here in Canada. We've had the Port of Montreal, closures on a couple of occasions. We've had major rail strikes that have impacted our traffic. And then you layer on tariffs and geopolitical tensions and the extreme weather events. And you know what? I think it just really reinforces on how important it is for organizations, first off, to be structured correctly and have senior leadership in the supply chain and procurement space, because they need to rely on them to respond to these challenges, to anticipate them, and candidly, to shape strategy and create resilience. And it's an exciting space to be in.
Absolutely. I love that phrase that your late father used, you cannot sell from an empty wagon. I think it paints a really vivid picture of ultimately what it boils down to, which is continuity of supply, right? And ensuring that a business can operate and run. If you don't have the product or the services, whatever that might be, the business can't operate. And that's why it's so fundamental that procurement and supply chain leaders are on top of that. Look, I could pick up on loads of things from that, Nick, but I'm just interested if you've got any insight into how you have dealt with tariffs, for example. I know it's been an ongoing issue between the US and Canada, but I don't know if you could share any sort of thoughts or how you've managed and navigated some of those complexities.
Yeah, it's a good question. Obviously, very timely with what we're dealing with now. in Canada, tariffs have really impacted, certain sectors like the energy, steel, aluminum, and of course the automotive sector. But for some of your listeners, I think it's important context to understand that, just under 80% of Canadian goods are exported to the US. Just for some context on how large our relationship is. And, even during all this volatility, the US still accounts for, I think it's just under 70% of Canada's exports. More than $3.5 billion each day goes over the border. So that's important as, to frame that as we look at the impact to Canadian businesses and consumers and whatnot. In our particular case, our owner, so in response to the tariffs, our owner, the Ontario government, they took countermeasures. And what they did was they asked us to replace all U.S. products that we retailed and wholesaled with either Canadian or other international alternatives. So with that in mind, I think it's important to note that, tariffs, U.S. products were a big part of our product assortment. We had over 3,500 different products that translated into $1 billion annually in sales. So it's a significant change in direction that happened with a very short turnaround. So what does that mean for supply chain practitioners from a supply chain perspective? Well, our role was we had to adapt quickly to the changes in assortment and sourcing. And, that translated into coordinating with suppliers, adjusting our inventory plans, and making sure that we kept the customer experience consistent despite changes in availability and selection. And, again, it's another instance of where, I'm very proud of the team and the organization on how we've been able to pivot and meet the owner's countermeasures. And, just as an example, in the past year, wine produced here in Ontario, what we call VQA wine, has increased by almost 22% in sales. So there's a lot of learnings and other countries have increased as well. But I think it really reinforces other commercial entities and retailers and wholesalers here in Canada have really seen a surge in a Canada first approach. I don't know if you've seen that over there, James, but that's definitely something that we felt here. And the LCBO had an innovative marketing program that we called the A list, spelled EH list. And, again, this was another successful promo that contributed to providing commercial opportunities for Canadian producers by showcasing over 3,000 Ontario and Canadian products. At the end of the day, I think the tariff situation has reinforced yet again how supply chains are strategic enablers and not just operational functions. Because to be successful, you have to respond quickly, you had to pivot, and of course, you have to maintain resilience in the face of sudden policy changes while continuing to meet the needs of your customers.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And again, it sounds like your team did a great job in responding. Agility kind of is the word that springs to mind, I think, about how you kind of responded. To your point, I think we are seeing that increase in an increasing awareness and an increasing acknowledgement that countries need to invest a little bit more in their kind of local supply chains and help evolve the internal kind of capabilities, I suppose, for countries. And I find it very interesting that the role that procurement and supply chains are going to play in that and the professionals who make those decisions. A couple more questions, if I may. These are new opportunities, these are new challenges that the procurement are facing. We talked about some of the technology changes that are happening, but what in your opinion are the kind of traits and the skills that are needed for procurement to kind of grasp this opportunity that they have?
Oh, so, that's a good question. And, I think leaders today, and supply chain and procurement are no different. They need to be strategic thinkers. They need to be risk managers and problem solvers, all the while kind of maintaining day-to-day operational excellence. And, one of the biggest changes that I've seen that I think is important for success is, and you've probably heard leaders need to lead by influence and not authority, but I would go a little step further and I would say how that leaders communicate today. And you need to communicate, storytelling and narrative building will really enable gaining that cross-functional alignment which in turn helps you shape culture and behaviors across the organization. So from a supply chain and procurement perspective, it's no longer just about whether it's logistics or cost anymore. It's about translating complex operational realities into insights that, your colleagues, fellow executives, your customers, your partners, and most importantly, your operational teams can act on. So being able to tell the story of supply chain performance and risk in a clear, compelling way is now essential. And, that kind of lends itself into team skills that you need on these supply chain teams as well. Today it's about data, it's about analytics, and it's about technology. AI is going to, shape the future of improving customer experiences and optimizing operations. But getting back to your question on the skills they need, leaders need agility. They need to have robust redundancy and contingency plans at all times. They need a strong understanding of key performance indicators just to measure how effective they're being in their decisions and to guide their decision making. So, I could go on: scenario planning, data-driven insights, and all the benefits of cross-functional collaboration have really become central to success. And, it goes back to what we mentioned earlier, and that's as we embrace these opportunities and think beyond more the traditional sense of what supply chain practitioners did, it's really about seeing that supply chain as a strategic lever that enables the organization to respond to challenges, to innovate, and deliver value consistently.
How does being part of NISCL, National Institute of Supply Chain Leaders, and now CIPS, Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply, fit into all this, into your capability building? In your eyes, how is being part of a professional membership body, and as a consequence, a global professional community, I think, benefited your career, and how does it continue to do so?
So it's benefited my career tremendously, and it's benefited the career of my team, and it's benefited the team as well. So that's why I invest so much time with the NISCL and CIPS. The first thing is right off the hop is these types of organizations, and these two in particular, they provide access to a global community of peers. And this, it really enables you to see how other organizations are tackling similar challenges. And the challenges could be in sourcing, they could be in risk management, sustainability, or technology adoption. So for me personally, it's been a great way to learn from others, to benchmark practices, and to bring back ideas, new ideas, back to the LCBO. The second big pillar, I would say, on the benefits of these two organizations and other like organizations are talent. It's a wonderful place to network and to tap into talent sources. So, that's another big deliverable. So for me, it's change. There's a lot of continuous learning opportunities that are provided by these organizations, and that's absolutely essential in these increasingly complex and rapidly changing environments. It reinforces the credibility of the profession, being connected to these global associations, and it really highlights that supply chain and procurement are strategic, they're evolving, and they're standards-driven disciplines, no different than law or accountancy. And I think that's important. So for me, it's I found a lot of benefit in being involved.
Yeah, and as we've talked about, as that influence grows of the profession, that credibility, that the global standard is even more important, and to showcase that it is a profession. It's not just a job. It's a career, and it's a profession, and it's something to embrace. And there's lots of really great opportunities to become part of that community if you join the likes of NISCL and CIPS, and develop and grow your professional network. I know, I've spoken to lots of CIPS members, and they've talked about they've met lifelong friends throughout sort of local branch networks, but also learned huge amounts of joining kind of global webinars and conferences that are regional and national at scale, and learning off what other people are doing and best practice. So I think that's really interesting. Look, Nick, thanks so much for your time. We really appreciate it. I've got one final kind of quick-fire practical question, if I may, that I'd like to finish on. You've scaled the ladder, LCBO. You've had a great career there, and you're now into a C-suite role. But what's one piece of practical advice you'd give to others on how to make that transition, that shift into a more senior gear?
I think I'd go back and, influence. Some practical advice that I'd offer is really, it gets down to influence and shift your focus from, doing the work yourself to enabling others, but more importantly, influencing the bigger picture. So let me shed a little bit of light on exactly what I mean with that. As you grow in your role within an organization, your timelines shift. As I'm sure many of you, your listeners and yourself know, in more junior roles, success is very often, it's measured by completing tasks and managing outputs. As you moved into more senior leadership, it's about thinking strategically, seeing the interconnections across the organization or the entire ecosystems and helping others succeed. So as you grow, your timelines evolve. That lends to communication, which is, again, it's that much more critical because you have to explain complex issues clearly to all your different stakeholders, to your colleagues, and to your teams. Relationships. There is no leader that will succeed in isolation. So it's so imperative that relationships are a focus. And finally, it's really about being able to kind of navigate through change and continuous learning and adaptability. Because the one thing I know for sure is the challenges that you'll face in the C-suite, they are most often than not more complex, they're more ambiguous, and they're of higher stakes. So being able to pivot and plan and maintain resilience is really what's going to enable you not just to survive, but more importantly, to thrive in those types of roles. So I've given you more than just one, but the one big one would be influence. And to think about it in those terms is the advice I would share.
So that's it for this episode of Futures. A huge thanks to Nick for joining us, and what a real privilege it was to hear the perspective of such an experienced supply chain leader in Canada. For those looking to know more about the dual membership proposition between CIPS and the National Institute of Supply Chain Leaders, we'll make sure to put a link into the episode description. If you're a regular listener, please do share it with your colleagues, teams, and network, and do give us a rating on your preferred podcast platform. It really means a lot to us and helps spread great stories like Nick's from all around the world to the rest of the procurement and supply profession. For now, though, that is it from us. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time. This podcast has been brought to you by CIPS, the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply. For more information on CIPS, head over to cips.org, where you can find out more about our upcoming events and all the excellent training opportunities on offer.